Welcome back to part 2 of History Unforgotten and some common sense. If you haven't seen my other video, I will cover some of the material in this video. So the last thing I talked about was how some of the Creek had been illegally removed at one point in history around the 1800s, just following the Civil War. In this video, I'll continue on that, but first I will cover some of the other material. You see this right here? This is what's often referred to as an arrowhead. Even though most of us know that this is not very aerodynamic to be on an arrow, as it would be kind of heavy on the end. So using some common sense, we would think that this probably went on another weapon. And if you were taught from an Indian education program, and you were in one of the areas where you would have easily found one of these, right? You would know that it was very likely on the end of an atlatl bolt, or what's referred to as an atlatl dart, which would be something like kind of like a short spear, or a very, 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 very long arrow bolt, right? So using some common sense, we would know this right here was very likely on the end of an atlatl, not an arrow, even though it's the commonly acceptable term to call this an arrowhead. Now, the history as it was passed down verbally, some of us of tribal descent, the creeks that were removed illegally from the state of Alabama just following the Civil War. Some historians have even begun to say that they were willingly leaving. That was only true for about the first group of them that decided to leave. They were highly encouraged to leave. They were even offered better land going out west from Alabama. The assisted transportation, once they had gotten partially out there, they weren't allowed to turn around and go back. They were escorted all the way out there. The second group, from beginning to being taken all the way out there, that was not voluntary. Now, this information is passed down verbally, as your history might have gotten ripped from you. I'm sharing some of the history that's been passed down verbally. The creeks that were illegally removed as part of that treaty, and the act of removing them was illegal, even to the treaty that might be controversial, was illegal. They didn't have the right to remove them. And the reason they done that was because those early Creek, who were also partially of black, they already had the right to vote according to the previous treaty. Yeah, see, that one right there is definitely controversial, isn't it? And we already see censorship going on online. I can recall when I was able to actually read some of the old treaties back when they were online and not edited. I can recall reading them. I've yet to find any of them recently, even on education sites. But we're going to use some common sense here. Some common sense. Your brother tribe members who knew that you already had the right to vote, being of tribal descent, it wouldn't make very much sense if you was to believe the historians, the ones holding the power of the pen, the historians trying to do more racial divide amongst the Creek. That would make that it would fall in line to what they've done in the past, wouldn't it? It would make common sense. Now you see that a lot of speculation you can surround with, oh, well, the second group, they said they left voluntarily. Well, let's use some common sense. If you look at the death tolls of the second wave, you only find that in any other parts in history where people are escorting prisoners. Because the common explanation for that much death, you couldn't even account for all of it if you were saying that some of them might have been older and starting to get sick along the way, and maybe some of them was with child and they lost the mother and the child. Because usually when someone's getting close to those sort of ordeals, they slow down, they let that person rest, and then they continue their journey and they're fine. Or if someone is with child, they slow down, they let that person give birth, and then they continue on. That doesn't even account for that. The only time you get death tolls like that is when you're escorting prisoners and they keep trying to get away. Those are the facts. That's just using some common sense. That would be as ridiculous as you saying that this right here would go on the end of an arrow, a short stick, and fired from a bow. It's that ridiculous. It doesn't add up to what's historically accurate. The Trail of Tears was called the Trail of Tears for a reason. It has more significance to those who know why it was called the Trail of Tears. And I'll tell you what that means. Even whites who had seen Native Americans removed following the Trail of Tears, when they visually saw them, they saw mothers carrying their dead sons. They saw fathers carrying their dead wives and their dead children. So they saw family members carrying the dead bodies of the dead because they were not allowed to stop to bury them. And that right there, that detail right there should never be forgotten in history. Regardless of the censorship. Regardless of the censorship that we see going on, as instead of going after companies that decided to do sponsors to collect people's birth dates who actually broke the law, we see some issues where they're going after videos and content creators if they speak the truth. Well, I'm not breaking the law. I haven't broken policies. I have spoken the truth. If your policy is too vague, then it's an opinion, and I can't judge on an opinion. Now, if I decided to do a video on telling you what the true origins of the Easter Bunny was, and you were somehow offended or thought that violated your policy, then really you're just censoring history. But we see that constantly. We see it constantly anyways. Here is some information for those who are actually wanting to know about the culture as we are getting close to Thanksgiving. These images would be on textiles of the Native Americans throughout every tribe in North America, right? So you saw a mountain, you saw a sun, you see a bird, right? Now this one right here is a little bit more complicated. It looks like a cone, but it actually means rain, but it could also mean prosperity. Now you see these right here, these symbols. What they are is part of history and part of culture. That by law, by treaty, and by federal law is supposed to be taught in some states, to those of tribal descent, as those of those tribes that got those treaties and got them valid had made it their right that by federal law, if you did not know what those symbols meant, that says something about the Indian education program at whatever school that your kids go to. Those symbols right there, if you are of tribal descent and you did not know what those symbols meant, did you take the Indian education program? Was it offered to you? Are your kids in the Indian education program? Is it offered to them? Are you in a state where it is required by law for them to do that? And see, that's not on the parents. That's not on the kids to know what their rights are. The school's responsibility and the state's responsibility, the state of Alabama's responsibility, is to make sure that they do everything that they're supposed to do in order to honor that treaty. They have to follow federal law. Now, if a teacher starts giving a student issues about what percentage of their family or who their family members are of descent, that's actually not the responsibility of the teacher, nor the school, nor the state. That responsibility does not fall on them, nor is it their authority to do that. That responsibility goes to whatever particular nation. So, if you've watched the video so far, feel free to hit like, hard like a ninja. Subscribe to be alerted for when I do videos on YouTube. Comment on this video and check out my other videos. I will keep going in this video. Common sense. Common sense would tell you that if you didn't know those and you were brought up in the state of Alabama, as the Creeks Treaty is still valid, the one prior to the 1800s, and you didn't know those, that should tell you something about the Indian education program that is supposed to be your treaty rights. Your treaty rights. And it's a little bit different than your civil rights. It's a little bit different than your civil rights. Your treaty rights are about the same as your constitutional rights, right? Like your Fourth Amendment, which is the right of due process, right? It's like the right to be able to. It's very much more like habeas corpus, but we'll try to stay away from just the legal aspects here. Let's get a little bit more close to Thanksgiving. Now, as we're getting closer to Thanksgiving, I'll talk a little bit more about this, right? And atlatls, as the atlatl was the primary weapon, primary ranged weapon of both the Creek and the Cherokee before the introduction of firearms. The Creek and the Cherokee was like, firearms are pretty cool. We think we're going to get some of those. And they did. And that's why their treaties are actually pretty good. Well, this symbol here That could be made on a. You could paint it on a wall, or you could put it on a textile like a basket or a blanket, right? Even clothing. It meant friendship. It also was often used for when they wanted to do trading, right? And if you notice, it looks like arrows, but it could also be atlatl bolts laid on the ground. So oftentimes, if someone thought it was a good idea to do trading or start trying to communicate, they would lay the arrows crossed on the ground. If the other people wanted to do trading or communicating, they would do the same thing across the top of them. And each person would lay their arrows down on the ground, or their atlatl bolts or atlatl darts on the ground, crossed. Now that's part of the culture, right? You have the symbols, and then you have the culture, which is a little bit more. If everyone's ammunition is laying on the ground, they're obviously friends, because they'd have to pick up their weapons if they really wanted to fight each other. So they would start communicating. They would start trading. And oftentimes they didn't even have to speak the same language. They would exchange stories if they spoke the same language. If I haven't mentioned it in this video, another part of treaty rights is that some of those illegally removed creek that was illegally removed from the state of Alabama back in the 1800s, some of them had already had the right to vote by treaty right. Now, historians might try to paint a picture like we see with the Puritans on Thanksgiving. Well, we know, we of tribal descent who got to do the Indian education program when the state still offered it, and have family who have passed this on verbally to us from stories. Stories that were important to pass on the information. We would know that Squanto was appointed by his tribe to, if we wanted to call the Puritans the first Thanksgiving, he was appointed to go teach the Puritans how to grow corn and potatoes. Those two crops came from America, as the Native Americans were very agriculturally advanced. And the first Thanksgiving with the Puritans was, of course, a peace offering so that the early settlers of the Puritans wouldn't starve and attack their village. That was their concern. They might have had a reason to have concern of that. So I will do another part video on this. So again, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Check out my other videos. And you can find me on Facebook under my artist name or my 10th Ninja name, Melel, that's M-E-L-E-O. And I have an Instagram, but I'm not going to tell you what my Instagram name is. You'll just have to be Ninja and go figure that out on your own. So until next time, stay ninja, my friends. Stay ninja.